They say the graveyard of innovation is littered with products that were technically superior but commercially irrelevant. And if you had to pick one headstone, one shining, chrome-plated monument to a colossal technology scandal, it would have to be the Sony Betamax. For decades, Sony was the untouchable titan, the company that gave us the Walkman, Trinitron, and generations of sleek, quality electronics. In 1975, when they unveiled the Betamax, they didn't just release a product. They unleashed a revolution. It was a machine that let you record television on your schedule. This felt like the future. And for a fleeting moment, Sony owned it. Except they didn't. By the early 1980 seconds, the Betamax was hemorrhaging market share. And by the end of the decade, it was the definition of a sunset product, effectively extinct. The Betamax lost the war, the VCR format war, to a technical inferior, VHS. This is a classic tech fail. How did one of the greatest tech companies in history, with the demonstrably better machine, make one of the biggest strategic blunders of all time? It's a fascinating question. This is the story of how hubris, proprietary thinking, and a fatal miscalculation about what consumers actually want led to the great Betamax tech fail. It's a story worth analyzing. To understand the scale of this historical technical disaster, you have to put yourself back into the mid-1970 seconds. Television was strictly appointment viewing. If M, A, S, H, or the evening news was on at 8 p.m., you had to be sitting right there. There was no pausing, no rewinding, and certainly no recording. It sounds archaic to us now, but that was the viewing reality until the video cassette recorder, the VCR, came along. It changed everything. Sony's Betamax was truly a marvel of engineering. Released in 1975, it was compact, beautifully designed, and its picture quality was undeniably crisper than anything else available. The tape transport mechanism was elegant, the tracking stable, and the machine felt like a premium piece of sophisticated equipment. Engineers who worked on it still speak of the Betamax with a kind of reverence. They created an engineering masterpiece, something technically outstanding. But less than a year later, in 1976, a rival arrived from Japan, Victor Company, or JVC, the Video Home System, or VHS. Critics and engineers immediately noted that the VHS picture wasn't quite as sharp as the Betamax. The tape loading felt clunkier and less refined. Betamax was, without question, the technically superior machine on paper. In a fair fight based purely on merit, Betamax should have won the competition easily. But technology rarely awards the victor based on specs alone. The Betamax failure is a textbook example of how a failed project can emerge not from bad engineering, but from bad business strategy. The seeds of Betamax's demise were sown right there on the showroom floor, not in the quality of the tapehead design, but in the recording time. This was the key strategic blunder. When Sony launched Betamax, the standard cassettes could only hold 60 minutes or 1 hour of footage. This limitation proved fatal. Why just 1 hour? Sony's executives, brilliant as they were, had a very specific vision for the VCR. They believed its primary function would be time shifting. They thought consumers would mainly use it to record one TV show while watching another, or maybe catch a single 30-minute program while they were briefly out. Their internal studies suggested 1 hour was perfectly adequate for this specific utility. Crucially, they never envisioned the VCR as a movie-watching machine. They failed to see the consumer's true ambition. JVC, however, saw the bigger picture, or perhaps just listened better to consumer desires. When VHS launched, its standard cassette offered 2 hours of recording time. Now, think about what 2 hours gets you in the mid-70 seconds and early 80 seconds. It gets you a major Hollywood blockbuster or a feature-length sporting event like the Super Bowl. It gets you 2 standard primetime dramas back-to-back without intervention. This was a critical difference for the consumer experience. With Betamax, you had to flip the tape, or worse, risk missing the last half hour of a movie. The difference between 60 minutes and 120 minutes was the difference between convenience and annoyance. For the average consumer, the tiny, marginal improvement in picture clarity that Betamax offered was utterly meaningless. It didn't hold a candle to the ability to record an entire film uninterrupted. This singular technical disaster of judgment, the 1 hour limit, gave VHS the crucial toehold it desperately needed. It was an initial advantage that proved insurmountable. Even when Sony finally started releasing longer tapes, offering 2 hours or more, the market momentum was already too powerful to stop. The consumer base had already begun forming their preference. But the recording time wasn't the only fatal wound in this format war. The second, and perhaps more profound, technology scandal was Sony's complete misunderstanding of open architecture. Sony's corporate culture was, and to some extent remains, fiercely proprietary. They invented the technology, so they wanted to control every single aspect of it. They refused to openly license the Betamax format to major competitors. They wanted to keep the Betamax a Sony-only product, commanding a high premium price and controlling the entire manufacturing supply chain. On the flip side, JVC took a completely different approach from Sony. They saw market dominance, not profit margin on a single box, as the key metric to pursue. JVC adopted an open licensing strategy for VHS. They practically gave away the blueprints for their format to their competitors, encouraging adoption. Major electronics giants like RCA, Mitsubishi, Hitachi, and, crucially, Panasonic, flocked to VHS. Why? Because they didn't want to rely on their competitor, Sony, for their own VCR product line. JVC made it easy for everyone to build a VHS machine, which accelerated its adoption globally. This led to a catastrophic result for Betamax. First, competition among a dozen manufacturers drove the price of VHS players down dramatically. Meanwhile, Betamax players remained high-end and expensive. Second, there was far greater availability for VHS. Every department store, every major electronics retailer was stocked with VHS machines from multiple brands. Betamax, by contrast, was relegated to just a few dedicated Sony-focused displays in the retail landscape. The omnipresence of VHS was undeniable. Third, the massive collaboration on VHS led to a quicker feature adoption and further improvements, simply due to the sheer number of engineers working on the same standard. The lesson here is brutal but clear. In a nascent technology market, market share trumps profit per unit. Sony's proprietary control ultimately choked the Betamax ecosystem before it could fully breathe. The last nail in the Betamax coffin was hammered in by a totally separate industry that exploded around the same time, the video rental market. This proved to be the kingmaker. Initially, VCRs were primarily for time-shifting purposes. But by the late 70 seconds and early 80 seconds, people realized they could watch movies at home, leading to the rise of the video rental store. This new cultural hub is where the two previous technology scandals, recording time and licensing, converged into an insurmountable problem for Sony. The lack of content spelled doom. Think like a video store owner in 1982. The vast majority of your customers own VHS players because they are cheaper and more widely available. It makes zero business sense to spend capital stocking tapes for the small percentage of Betamax owners. VHS had the customers, and the store owners followed the customers. Furthermore, for any movie longer than an hour, the studio had to master 2 separate Betamax tapes for rental, doubling inventory costs and management complexity. For VHS, it was just one tape. The video rental industry overwhelmingly chose VHS as their standard format. As the industry boomed, the rental shelves became almost exclusively VHS tapes. This created a powerful, undeniable feedback loop that accelerated the format war's conclusion. The content dictated the hardware purchase. The consumer would go in wanting to rent a popular movie, only to find it was only available on VHS. They would then conclude they needed a VHS player to watch the content they wanted. Betamax owners were trapped in a tech fail cycle. They couldn't rent the most popular content, which solidified their decision to switch to VHS when their Betamax player broke down or they bought a new machine. The lack of content, which was fueled by the machine's initial design flaw, the 1-hour limit ultimately cemented VHS's status as the undeniable consumer default. Sony fought valiantly for a time, refusing to give up the fight. They introduced the Betamax ED beta system in the mid-80 seconds, which had truly spectacular picture quality. The quality was arguably better than anything VHS could ever produce, even years later. But by then, it simply didn't matter to the average consumer. The VHS player was already under the TV in 80% of American homes. You simply cannot win a format war with a better product if 90% of the content is only available on the other format. The Betamax failure wasn't just a loss for Sony. It was a profound learning experience for the entire tech world. This single historical technical disaster taught companies 4 core lessons. Lesson 1. Convenience beats quality. The consumer will almost always sacrifice a slight amount of technical quality for a significant increase in convenience and utility. Lesson 2. Ecosystem is king. The success of a platform hinges not on the hardware specifications, but on the size and health of the ecosystem around it, the content creators, the licensees, and the retailers. Lesson 3. Anticipate the primary use. Sony was fixated on time shifting, a minor function. JVC intuitively understood the major function would be watching full-length movies. A product's true value is defined by the consumer's behavior and desires, not the original designer's intent. That misalignment proved costly. Lesson 4. Beware of the installed base. Once a format reaches critical mass, the installed base, it becomes incredibly difficult, almost impossible to displace, even with a superior offering. The momentum of the user base is demonstrably more powerful than any advertising budget or marginal technical improvement. The Betamax tech fail set the stage for every format war that followed. When DVD arrived, the manufacturers learned their lesson, and DVD was an openly licensed standard from the start. This ensured rapid, widespread adoption for the DVD format, avoiding the Betamax mistake. The industry had evolved. When high-definition video arrived in the mid-2000s, Sony found itself in another epic clash. Blu-ray versus HD DVD. This time, Sony did not repeat its proprietary mistake. They worked tirelessly to secure critical studio backing, particularly from Warner Brothers, and ensured the Blu-ray format was openly licensed. The content strategy was paramount. When HD DVD's lead partner, Toshiba, faltered and ceded content, Blu-ray quickly achieved the critical content mass that Betamax had lacked years ago. Sony won that one, but only by adopting the strategies VHS had used against them. The Betamax is a cautionary tale, a permanent fixture in the Museum of Technology scandals. It reminds us that innovation is only half the battle. The other half is business strategy, understanding the market, adapting to consumer behavior, and sometimes swallowing your pride and letting others play in your sandbox. Sony had the better machine, the better engineers, and the better technology, but VHS had the better strategy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the Betamax lost the war, leaving us with a superior sunset product that could have, and probably should have, defined the home video era. So, the next time you hear a company boasting about their proprietary technology or a new gadget with slightly superior specs, remember the ghost of the Betamax. Remember the 1-hour flaw. Remember the refusal to share the format. And remember, the biggest tech fail isn't when a product doesn't work perfectly. It's when it works perfectly, but fails to understand its user. What other technically superior products lost their market battle? Let me know in the comments below. Did you or your parents own a Betamax? Share your memories of the great format war. Hit that like button if you appreciate the deep dive. Subscribe to Tech Fails for more historical technical disasters. And we'll see you in the next one.